Thanks, Lou. I can't remember many stories that have sucked up more oxygen or provoked more heated responses than the governor's announcement last week. It's all anyone can talk about, and we want to devote a large portion of our show to sort through the ramifications and where things might go from here. Joining me at the table this week are APD Sergeant turned attorney Tom Grover, then across the table, longtime civil rights and defense lawyer Frank Davis. By way of disclosure, Frank represented me once in a successful fight for public records. And I'm pleased to have Marisa DeMarco, a forever New Mexico reporter who, like me, has covered a lot of the issues we're going to discuss tonight. Marisa is a national editor for State's Newsroom these days. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
We're going to spend plenty of time on the governor's order and fallout from it, but we want to get quickly to the elephant in the room, the Second Amendment. Judge Urias has granted gun owners' request for a temporary restraining order, saying they have, quote, a substantial likelihood, unquote, of prevailing if the case proceeds. Frank, let's start with you. What does the judge's order mean?
The judge's order means that this order likely violates the Second Amendment and is unconstitutional. And I think that that's something that most everyone is going to agree upon. The Second Amendment is intended to protect the individual's right to self-defense. And we start with the presumption that if the conduct is covered by the text of amendment, which here we're talking about carrying in a public place, that the conduct is constitutional. And I think that pretty well does away with the most controversial portion of the governor's order.
Did it come as a surprise to anybody from your perspective that this went the way that it went?
It's shockingly to me. There are a good number of lawyers who were supportive of the governor's order, and these are folks that I myself look up to, and I think that they're good lawyers, and they've been doing this a lot longer than me. But what the sentiment has been is that finally someone's doing something. But I don't think that anyone realistically believed that it would withstand any sort of constitutional scrutiny.
Tom, I'll kick this to you too. Obviously the judge's order is granting a temporary restraining order. It's not a broad ruling in the case, it's pretty narrow. From your perspective, was the governor's order just a straight up violation of the Second Amendment?
I think aspects of it clearly were. I mean, without a doubt. It put in place restrictions that have already been adjudicated by the U.S. Supreme Court. And, that's, I'm talking about the Bruen case, obviously, and that's in a setting of Manhattan, right? Well, here we are in the Southwest where, like it or not, guns are a part of the culture here and the history. And with what she did with her order was such overreach, it's not surprising with what happened.
Let's pull back a little bit here and talk about the problem the governor says she's trying to fix. We saw 120 homicides in this city last year. That's a record by a lot. Mayor Tim Keller says the numbers are leveling off a bit this year, but we are still way above national averages for violent crime. I think everyone who lives here would agree that the vibe in our city feels a little different than it used to 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. And of course, the governor's order cites the shooting deaths of 2 young children. Tom, I want to go back to you. You're a former cop. What sits under the crime problem here? And do the governor's proposals present a viable solution from your perspective?
I think they're misguided at best, because what I see, and this is based off of having been a street cop for 8 years in bad sections of the city and now having been an attorney for almost 10 years, is that things are bad and things have gotten worse. And with the police sort of withdrawing back, courtesy of the new mayor back in 2018 and DOJ reform, there's been really like a lack of guardrails. And it's like watching a soccer game when you've got weak officiating. It doesn't take too long for the kids start to really get out of control and people to get injured, because they realize they can take actions and there's no repercussions. And from my perspective, I mean, that's really what's going on. And there isn't anything in the order that suggests there's going to be any sort of, reinforcement to the guardrails to put people in a position where they recognize that if I do something wrong, chances are I'm going to get stopped or have some contact with somebody who I don't want to have contact with, that being law enforcement.
But I'll jump in and say too that guns have been, and violence and gun violence have been a problem in Albuquerque and in New Mexico for a very long time. And we have actually seen overall, if you're pulling way back and looking at the scale, we've started to see declines in those things. And all throughout the pandemic, people were telling us that we were going to see more domestic violence, more substance use, that sort of thing, because of the impacts of isolation, and that would have effect on the city for years and years to come. And so I wonder if we're starting to see some of the impacts of that. Also, I will say about the hearing yesterday that what I was reading in Source New Mexico's reporting is that the judge seems to be giving the state the opportunity to produce the evidence that we're in an especially acute phase of public health emergency, right? And that could potentially justify the order, is what the conversation in the courtroom seemed to be pointing at yesterday. Also, the judge was pointing out that the back and forth between the judge and the attorneys was around, there was a public health order during the pandemic about gathering in public places. And this was because COVID, a deadly virus, could immediately be passed to one another from those gatherings. And the question is, does simply having guns in public places increase the likelihood of gun violence? That seems to be at the crux of the conversation in court.
For sure. And I want to stick with you for a minute too and talk about, based on your years of reporting here too, could the governor's, all of this energy from the governor, have been better spent focusing on the things that you and I have both been reporting on for all of these years that sit under the crime, whether that's substance use disorder, poverty? There are a million factors that we all know. Do you feel like her energy could have been better spent to focus on some of those things instead of picking this big fight with the Second Amendment?
What stuck out to me was that this was a public health order, but these are not necessarily what public health experts would recommend as solutions, right? So public health is about looking at the overall health, the big statistics. It struck me as somewhat of a knee-jerk reaction that relies heavily on increased law enforcement, whether that's for guns or for other things. And so it's public health order in kind of name only in that way, right?
So the governor conceded at her news conference last week that she wasn't sure how this was going to play out in court. And now she's lost the first round. But almost from the beginning, she's hinted that her main goal is to kickstart a debate about gun violence.
But I'm doing it because I think that debate and getting into the session about what does need to work is appropriate. And if not me, then who is going to initiate the debate?
If this order was meant to be a conversation starter or to spur the legislature to pass stricter gun laws, was a big executive order the best way to do that? I'll let anybody who wants to take a swing at this one to go for it, but has that message been overwhelmed by what most folks see as a massive government overreach? Frank.
The conversations have certainly been ignited, so I can't call it a failure in that regard.
Right, we're talking about it.
Right, and everyone is. You have people from Elon Musk calling for her removal from office, all the way to reporters across the country using words like tyranny, despot, things like that. So the controversy has succeeded in igniting a discussion, and I think that all of us can agree that there is some sort of emergency going on with the way that we're losing lives to gun violence. How we go about dealing with that, I think, is where we're going to reach disagreement.
Does anybody think that we're going to settle into, eventually, the conversation that the governor wants here, which is about gun violence? Are we going to get past this initial shock and outrage and memes all over Twitter of her with a hammer and sickle sitting beneath her face?
I think she's animated a portion of the demographic out there that has been on the sidelines but now is actively opposed to her. I mean, I don't see a silver lining to what she's done, because she's alienated herself with people that weren't previously alienated from her. Sure, she might have consolidated some support upon people that already had a posture when it comes to gun control, but in terms of where things go in the long game, I don't see how this is a benefit, because the whole issue of crime has been pushed off to the side and the projection has been put upon her for dictatorial powers or tyrant or things like that. So I think it's sort of ambushed whatever benefit could have been brought from it or from her office.
I think the conversation has so largely focused on the Second Amendment, and that has subsumed kind of the conversation about gun violence. But the other thing that occurs to me is she had to have known that that was where this was going to go, at least in the early days. And so I don't know what is the next move in this conversation, or what is really being angled at, right? This move kind of feeds into that far-right paranoid nightmare about dictatorial control and the government is coming for your guns, right? And so I just don't understand how it is that we won't end up stuck there in that conversation, as opposed to having the one that everybody's angling to have about gun death rates and gun violence in New Mexico.
I have to disagree just a little bit with Thomas and Marisa, because I think that there is a sigh of relief from some people that finally someone is doing something. We've seen mass shooting after mass shooting, we've seen killing after killing, violence throughout our state, and now it just feels like, okay, nothing has been done in each of those instances, whether or not that's accurate. But now the governor has done something. But I think she's created a responsibility and an onus for herself to keep this going. She can't just throw up her hands and say, oh, I tried and the court struck me down. She has to be more creative. She has to be more thoughtful. This order doesn't seem that thoughtful. And it doesn't seem like she put a lot of effort into crafting something that was going to be constitutional. But if she goes forward and she tries to come up with some solution that is creative and thoughtful and has some brain power behind it, we could see a change finally on this gun violence issue.
The thing is that we haven't seen that yet, and maybe this is a media coverage criticism, right? Which, member of the media over here. But we've seen primarily from even members of her own party, from, everybody has criticism of this move, largely based on the firestorm it ignited about the Second Amendment. I haven't seen in much coverage people who, even just everyday people who might be like, well, thank goodness, we needed something. And even if it only stood for, what was that, 5 days? Was it, I don't know if it got through a whole week. Not quite a week, right?
Yeah.
We needed something like that. I haven't seen that in the media coverage just yet. So I guess my comments are more focused on what we have seen, which is even members of her own party speaking against it. Very few people being willing to take a public stand that they're in support of this move, right?
Like Miranda Viscoli, right? That was one name that immediately came to mind. But I want to rewind the tape just a little bit to last weekend. We all saw images of guys with beards and long guns protesting on the Old Town Plaza last weekend. Marisa, you were there. Mm-hmm. I want you to tell me, please, what that felt like. What was it like down there?
People were outraged. People were heavily armed. There was a notable lack of visible police presence. I covered, I think, all of or most of the protests in 2020, in which thousands of people were out speaking against gun violence, and they were unarmed, and there was heavy police presence, even at things like candlelight vigils and such. It was smaller, maybe a few hundred people, 300, something like that. But there was not people there, there was not state police officers there that were visible who were enforcing this order, right, which was already in effect. And we're seeing people with, really heavy weaponry, and intentionally carrying it in a very visible and intentional way, right?
It sounded like things were pretty tense based on our conversation in advance of taping today.
Yeah, I think even among the speakers, there was warnings like, keep it cool, everybody, because that's a lot of firepower to have in one place. And what does it take for that to turn into something really bad and violent, right? Which was interesting because that seems to be around speaking to what the governor's speaking to a little bit as well, which is like, how many high-powered guns does it take in a small area for something to turn into violence, right? But there was a lot of speaking about, okay, we're here to be passionate, but cool, let's keep it cool, and there was not any violence. I don't know if the scenario would have been different had the police shown up and issued citations for being a violation of the order. Mm-hmm. They're in Old Town under the gazebo, tourists are wandering around the perimeter, and they have, massive guns, right? So it was an interesting scene, to say the least.
One more thing I want to get to, and Tom, I want to start with you on this one. The Second Amendment argument will continue to play out in the federal courts beyond the temporary restraining order that Judge Urdias granted earlier this week. But is there a bigger legal conversation here? Is there a case, potentially, that winds up in front of the state Supreme Court in which we finally get to sort out the limits of executive power?
Undoubtedly, I think it's headed that way. But I want to remark one thing about the protest on Sunday. A couple years ago, I represented a young African-American man that went to Civic Plaza, decked out in the same sort of paramilitary attire that those protesters were wearing on Sunday, with a .223 AR variant rifle, and he wasn't out on the sidewalk adjacent to Civic Plaza for maybe 5 minutes before APD's emergency response team came down, made contact with him, and they pulled him aside. And then there was this big kerfuffle about whether or not he was going to be cited or not. APD did a social media post saying he had been detained and was going to be cited. Long story short is the city ended up paying my client a fair amount of money for that.
Yeah, and we'll get to some of that in the second segment for sure, but let's talk about the executive power thing. Sorry to push you back on track.
No, I think it's headed that way if the Republicans certainly get their way. And I think with the type of counsel that were in court yesterday, there is a fair amount of broad spectrum interest in this issue that's not limited just to Democrats or Republicans, conservatives or liberals, about what it means when the chief executive takes an action that's in contravention to the Constitution, whether it's the state or federal. And, we saw a lot of people upset about what the governor had done during the pandemic. And I think this is sort of an extension of that. And I think it's going to go back to the Supreme Court in one way or fashion. And we know how it played out the last time is before the Supreme Court, and they went 5-0 against her.
Frank, I want you to weigh in on this one too. Do we need an actual better definition for what constitutes a public emergency in this state? Do we need that spelled out?
I think it's on the way. I have a good word that the Republican Party is filing a case in state court this week that was going to seek to confine what these public health emergencies mean. Whether we need it or not is a different question. I mean, there's really been limited use, and it arose in the context of the pandemic, which of course was a worldwide, once in a lifetime sort of phenomenon. But now we have it rearing its head again. And that was my initial concern when the governor first used this emergency power, was we're going to see another emergency, right? That's sort of what happens when you give a politician these sort of powers. And so probably we could benefit from some sort of definition or some instruction from the court. So I think that is necessary.
That way we're not guessing. We'll have to stop the first conversation there. Thank you all for being part of this, but we aren't done. We'll meet back here at the table in about 15 minutes to talk over the rest of what was included in the governor's order and what could come of it, like the suspension of the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative.